Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. Are you planning to travel with your group sometime soon? If so, please consider my sponsor, Kaleidoscope Adventures, a full-service tour company specializing in student group travel. With a former educator as its CEO, Kaleidoscope Adventures is dedicated to changing student lives through travel, and they offer high-quality service and an attention to detail that comes from more than 25 years of student travel experience. Trust Kaleidoscope's outstanding staff to focus on your group's one-of-a-kind adventure so that you can focus on everything else. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Jake Walker and Colin Peters for their contributions to the show, and especially to all of you who are listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music. So now, on to my next guest, David Maslanka. Hi, Matthew.
How you doing?
I'm doing great. Sorry for all the trouble. We had a little bit of a technical difficulty, and I apologize for that.
All good. Happy to be here.
So, Matthew, you are episode 200, and your name is well known, and your father's music is well known, but I know that you are also yourself a musician.
I am.
And you are operating all of your father's music publishing yourself, right? You kind of are the proprietor of that.
So the situation is slightly more complicated.
Okay.
So I handle about half of his music.
I see.
Which is more or less everything after 2007 and before about 1990. And much of the other music is held by Carl Fisher and by a few other people here and there.
Sure. This is kind of getting into the weeds, and of course you don't ever have to answer anything, but are you thinking about trying to purchase that back or just leave it?
Yeah, absolutely. That's part of the plan. There's a clause in the copyright law which allows for a 35-year reversion of copyright. So we can simply ask for it back after 35 years, and we just kind of get it back, no questions asked. And this actually works best for everyone because they know it's coming, and we know it's coming, so we can prepare things ahead of time so that we're ready to go right on the day.
I see. That makes a lot of sense. So now I'm just kind of getting a timeline. I don't know your father's biography, that well, but when was he? I know he was in New York City when he first started writing. That he was a professor. Was he at Hunter College? I'm trying to remember.
So he taught at SUNY Geneseo, that State University of New York. And then he went to Hunter for a little while, and then to Kingsborough College.
Okay, I see.
And taught for something like 20 years, thereabouts.
Mm-hmm.
And then he was tenured, and my mom was finishing her PhD at Lexington. No, it was at Hunter. And everybody was getting real sick of things, turns out. Dad had a 2-hour commute we were in Inwood, which is in the northwesterly corner of Manhattan, and it's a 2-hour train ride to college where he was teaching, which is not fun for anybody. No. And Mom was getting real disillusioned with the science community, something about nepotism and favoritism. And they just said, you know what? We're going to make a break for it. And my mom and my sister got on a plane and said, let's make a list of a couple of places, and they ended up in Missoula, Montana. We all drove out in 1990, and it was a lot quieter, turns out,
than Manhattan
in Missoula.
Yeah, no doubt. So Matthew, let's rewind this interview back a little bit. So now normally with most of my guests, what I would do is I would start with their biographies, but because you're kind of in a unique situation, you are your own entity, of course. You're a musician, you're handling your father's business, so you're integral to the band world, but yet we're also talking about your father's music. So I kind of want to try to kind of do things maybe on a parallel. So How do you want to to handle this? Do you want to talk about, maybe give your background first, tell everyone about what you do and where you're coming from, and then maybe we'll dive into some of your dad's stuff?
Sure.
Okay.
So most of my story is heavily intertwined with his.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
His music and the way that he came to the world is deeply shaped who I am.
Sure.
When he would take me to school, he would teach me music theory, which a lot of kids don't get.
Mm-hmm.
And I started doing work for him when I was 10 years old or thereabouts. I started making cassette recordings of pieces and photocopies of scores to send out to conductors who were interested in the music.
Mm-hmm.
So I have the tape recording process. I had two choices. It was either full speed or half speed, or double speed, I should say. And I had to listen to it.
Right.
And the choice was I could either hear or music.
Right.
So I listened to the music. So I ended up listening to something like the marimba concerto for marimba and band several dozen times. Symphony 4, the saxophone sonata, all this music. So at this massively formative age, this was the music that was in my ears.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And as a result, that is my conception of what music is. And then everything else built on top of that.
So it's interesting, I have my own children as I look at how they follow. My wife is a cellist and I'm a composer and band teacher. And so I watch their sort of the way they look at us and the way we do things. It's a striking kind of place to be as a parent. And I imagine as a child too.
It's the only thing I knew.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't really listen to the radio until I was in high school or understand what pop music was. Like, it took me until college to realize that other things kind of existed.
Right.
Which was a really fun. So for me, things like EDM are my discoveries rather than anything that I was exposed to.
So, Matthew, you are a musician, correct?
That's right.
You were playing the Goldberg variations for me a minute ago, so I know that you have some piano skills. What else do you do?
I am trained as a euphonium and trombone player. So I started playing euphonium when I was 10 and went all the way through, damn near got a doctorate in the thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I got to the point, though, of it didn't seem to make sense to go on. So I live in New York City. There's a whole lot of music going around. I've played in orchestras in town. I've performed an enormous amount. You mentioned the piano. I took piano lessons when I was a very small kid and when I was in college, but I never really pursued it much. About 4 months ago, I decided, you know what, I'm going to figure out how this piano thing works. And it's been one of the most useful and interesting things that I've done in recent memory. So I have done nearly everything in music. I've been a performer. I have directed. I've recorded. Been a producer. I do sheet music preparation, music engraving, and music had become a job, just a straight up job. And I was focused on the production aspects of it far more than any creative aspects. And so I got the piano in my tiny, tiny New York apartment, which required me to give up my dresser. And plopped down a copy of the Bach Goldberg Variations and said, you know what? I am not a good pianist, but what I do have is patience and a musical background. And a couple of friends who play piano can give me some tips. And I started from the back. I went the last note of the last bar. Okay, last two notes of the last bar. And then kept on going one bar at a time, going backwards and memorizing as I went. And so I end up with, it feels like going home and I can get the mechanics into my fingers. The most joyful thing about the whole process is that I'm making the whole piece of music by myself, that I don't have to go to rehearsal. I don't have to raise money. I don't have to do anything. except for be present and musically engaged. And so I have taken this, it's sort of re-fired the spirit. So I can take this experience and then bring it into my other work. Remember why I'm doing this.
Sure. It's interesting, that you say that. I was a longtime college music theory professor, and I didn't feel like I was making music. I was a composer too, but I really missed being a band director, and I actually left theory teaching completely to teach kids again. So I teach 4th through 8th grade kids, and I got to tell you, I love it. Hot cross buns is pretty cool when it's the first thing, the first time they play it. And there's a certain joy to that, and music making that, I don't know, just being with people or just doing it in a way that's active and not sort of passive inside is so valuable. Yeah.
It's about being engaged and focused in what you're doing.
Yeah.
And whatever that happens to look like. One of the issues with the professional music world is that everybody's tired and nobody cares much.
Yeah.
That it's all very, very competent people doing everything. But the music is often uninspiring. And it's just some stuff. You got to get through the recording day. Okay, fine.
Yeah. No, there's no question of that. It's interesting. I always try to connect things that my guests say to me to like my own experiences to try to filter them in my own way. And my wife plays, she's a cello professor, but she plays every summer with the Eastern Music Festival. And that's Jerry Schwartz down there. And, these musicians come from all over the countries from their regular full-time gigs. And then they come down there and it feels so energetic compared to the rest of the year because it's like a new situation. It's 5 weeks. They just do it. It's not their normal job. There's something to that, truly, that change of scenery that can create energy.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I love about high school and college bands is that you can get a character of engagement that you don't get in the professional world. And this is one of the things that Dad found most helpful and interesting about the space.
Yeah. So can you tell me now, I'm trying to fashion this for my listeners, but I'm filtering it through what I know. So it's hard. I want to make sure that I do justice to the whole story. Can you go back and talk about maybe your dad's origins as a composer? Now, I know he became a college professor, and I know that he began to write for bands a little bit later in his career. Am I correct in assuming that?
More or less.
Maybe you can walk me through it so I don't get it wrong.
Yeah. He started, so he went to Oberlin and Michigan State University, studied as a composer. One of his major teachers was H. Owen Reed, which is where he was introduced to the band world for the first time. He was Reed's copyist. And that experience, I think, more than anything, gave him the sense that this sort of thing was possible. One of the things that he would often say was that if you want to know a piece of music, you should take the score and copy it out by hand. And it is, if you've never done it, I really recommend it to you.
I actually have done it.
You will, there's no substitute for touching every symbol on the page.
Mm-hmm. No, there's no question. Isn't that the exercise? Isn't that what, what was it that Beethoven's talked about his teacher made him do? Copy out the Bach fugues by hand, the well-tempered clavier. There's some kind of,
heard this, but yeah,
it might be apocryphal, but
it would be the way to go.
Yeah.
And he would take that character of study all the way through his life. So he discovered the Bach chorales as a daily practice in the early 90s after he got to Montana. But I'm also skipping ahead a little bit. So this is when he was at Michigan State. This is the late 60s. And he was writing in that academic style at the time, which is angular and aggressively atonal and very expressionistic, you might say.
Sure.
And from there, he got to Geneseo, taught, he wrote, he directed a women's choir for a little while. So he has some choral music from that time. And the Robert Isgro Singers did a piece called A Litany for Courage in the Seasons, which became a touchstone, which is a choral work with vibraphone and clarinet. Beautiful, beautiful work. Shows up again in Hosannas, which is a much later band work. Around the times of 1979, 1978, he did a piano concerto for Fred Fennell because he was friends with the pianist, Joseph Cicciaria, which turned out to be the piano concerto. And this was heard by John Painter over at Northwestern, who then commissioned to do a band piece. And that band piece turned into a Charles Garden of Dreams. So this is in 1980, 81. And from there, everybody said, holy crap, this is amazing. We want all of this forever. And so the commissions just kept on coming.
Yeah, when I think about your father, that's the piece that I think of like as the work that sort of defines his career, because it's both sort of like an arrival and a launching point in my
Absolutely.
mind. You know, so the reception for that, you mentioned that John Painter had heard the piano concerto and commissioned him for this. What, your father was still in New York at the time. What was, do you remember his reaction, or do you know, did he have told how that changed him as far as the decisions that were to come?
This was a period of immense energy for him. He had before this, in the late 70s, late 60s, mid 70s, he was married with a young son, my brother Stephen, and was starting to drink and smoke himself to death. And the pressure of trying to be something that he wasn't was happening a lot. Mm-hmm. This is trying to write in a style that didn't feel to fit him, feel like it fit him, while trying to be an academic, which he could do, but never really felt settled in, while trying to be a good husband and father. It eventually drove him to a point of, I suppose catastrophe is the word, but it was a real breakdown. Mm-hmm. He utterly crashed and had to take basically a year off and get clean and get sober and start dealing with his emotional problems. Coming out of this, through therapy, he discovered the work of Carl Jung. Mm-hmm. He discovered the character of music that sang in his heart. There's a truth to the old stories and understandings and music of the world that he found utterly fascinating. You talk about Jung, you get into archetypes, you have the underlying structures of human consciousness. You start getting to Bach, you have a true expression of the underlying forms of Western music. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about the joy of hot cross buns, this is 3, 2, 1, da, 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 is the basis of Western music.
Very Shankarian, but yes.
I mean, if you want to get there. Yeah. So, and this idea of trying to find the truth at the heart of a thing became a driving force for him.
That's interesting. Okay, I don't want to bury this point, but I want to make sure that I kind of get into it enough that because I have a lot of questions about this idea. First of all, I want to make sure that we back up and talk about mental health in a little bit, because I think that's something that we need to talk more about, and I'm glad you brought it up. Sure. My experience, my single experience meeting your father was over lunch. He had a band piece being played here in the St. Louis area a few years ago, a couple years before his death, and he was having lunch, and I basically kept him company while he ate Subway, and we had a long conversation. And what really struck me about that conversation was I was in a very similar place. I had an academic doctorate in composition, and I was writing angular music, and I had come back to the band world, and I remember he was really insistent on trying to get me to look inside, find the answer, And to this day, I'm not sure I found the answer, but I still remember it, when I'm like struggling to compose or whatever is going on. It's like, I think about your father in that moment, like what he was saying. Can you maybe delve into that aspect of his philosophy and kind of what that's about?
He wanted to find the truth of a moment.
Mm-hmm.
So you have, he became fascinated with sound and vibration as a pure idea, as a pure experience. And so when he writes a fermata, he would say you should hold it for as long as it needs to be held, but not longer. And when you hold that fermata, what you should be looking for is for the sound to become itself.
Interesting.
When you listen closely to the sound that you're making, it changes its character. There's a focus and a resonance that you find there that you can't get any other way. And so you'll find his music becomes more and more spare over his career.
Mm-hmm.
From quite maximalist to Symphony No. 9 is basically a chamber piece. And he kept on stripping away and stripping away and stripping away to find the heart of a thing. I like to think of it almost in calculus terms. You have a curve. Every point on that curve has an instantaneous slope.
Mm-hmm.
It is its own thing, but it's also going somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So you have a point and a line at the same time. And he would focus really hard on the point
Mm-hmm.
and allow it to be itself and grow into the line that it was already.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting because I have a little bit of a theory background. So what I see in this is this journey from his but his journey from his education, in that sort of, as you put it, aggressively atonal, coming out of Schoenberg's idea, this notion of organicism where you have one thing that is at the heart of everything else to come. So in a way, it's almost like he was kind of going around a journey around the egg in a way to come back to that idea, but with his own understanding of it. Is that fair?
I expect it might be. So the immediate resonance for me is you have Christ talking to the Pharisees, saying, like, you're following all the rules, but you forgot the point.
You're right. And in a lot of ways, that's what let me say this, and I got to be careful because, I respect a lot of people, but I do think to a certain extent, new music, and I use air quotes here for my listeners, it did become almost an exercise in satisfying itself. We think about Milton Babbitt, who cares if you listen, right? That kind of idea.
So music as an intellectual exercise can only be a curiosity.
Yes, I agree with that.
It can be an interesting curiosity, but unless it has the heart, it doesn't matter. And one of the most useful pieces of advice he gave me as regards composing, so I came to him very proud with the thing that I'd written, and he took a look at it and went, all right, well, these 8 bars in the middle of this 10-minute thing are what you're trying to talk about.
Mm-hmm. So
throw the rest of it away.
Right.
And go back to those 8 bars and figure out what those actually are.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and there's a lot of good. That's a very wise way to look at it because, how did he manage to do that in the midst of commissions? Because I know when there's a time, there's a clock ticking. Often, I'm just wondering how that worked in practical terms, if that makes sense. My
mom would say that, especially around the beginning of a piece of music, that was a bear to be around. Deeply unpleasant. And I suspect a lot of that comes with this idea that I won't be able to do this again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And I suspect that he was plagued with that character of doubt.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, a lot of musicians and artists creators are.
So what happens, though, is that you do have this deadline, and that deadline isn't going anywhere. And the creative process cannot be linear. Cannot say, I'm going to write 10 bars today, I'm going to write 10 bars tomorrow, I'm going to write 10 bars the day after that, and it'll be fine. Or if you do that, it will turn into this wooden formulaic nonsense.
Sure.
So his approach was to generate a staggering amount of material.
Oh, interesting.
This is an amount. This is sketches that he would do. His daily practice was to do a Bach chorale, to sing through the soprano, alto, tenor, bass line, and then do a period of sort of free association, basically. He would generate sketches and generate ideas, and then he'd put them on the haystack, and then he'd focus on the work that he was doing on the piece that he was trying to do. And this was a creative thing. Because he worked with these sketches so often, he would have a good working knowledge of what they were and where they were. And so these were all floating around in his head. So as he did his walks, he did an hour or two of walking every morning, they would float, they would come together naturally, they would associate themselves. And so the process became trusting that it would work. It's creating a space for creativity to happen, doing the mechanics of the thing, and then allowing the space for the magic to happen inside.
Yeah, absolutely. Creativity is a very complicated topic.
Oh boy.
And, there's so many theories about how it works and how it doesn't. But the one thing that really strikes me about that is, well, two things actually, is one that your father almost has a warm-up routine like a brass player does for his day. And second, he allows himself to go for that walk. And now I'm presuming this was alone without any sort of media or anything like that.
No devices at all.
Yep. So just a walk, so to let his mind be free. Yeah, no, that's very striking to me. I think to a certain extent we're losing that in society. That's a broader topic, of course, but the ability to be quiet.
Not even a dog.
Not even a dog. That surprises me, actually.
So yeah, just him in the mountain.
Now, did you guys have a dog? Was a dog jealous?
Sure. He had
it's like, what about me?
An acre in Missoula, and the dogs kind of ran outside, and they were fine.
Oh yeah, no, I understand. I imagine if I went for a walk, my dog would be very, very angry with me when I came home. Anyway.
It would deal with it.
No, I know. I'm being facetious.
Good.
So yeah, this is a tremendous kind of bit of advice to give space to the creative process. I really, really admire that. Now, you mentioned that he told me this too when I talked to him, that he sang through and played through Bach chorales every day. And yes. I know that your father was very spiritual. And that comes through clearly in his music. You don't have any doubt when you listen to it. Can you talk about that connection between that daily practice of the chorales and maybe the broader spirituality of your father? Or am I making a connection that doesn't exist?
I think it's all of a piece. The idea of seeking the center of a thing runs through the whole process of being alive for him. So the center of his world was the breath, and paying attention to that, and then going inside and allowing what needed to happen to happen. He had a meditation process that he would earlier call active dreaming, where he would. It's related to Michael Harner's work with shamanism and shamanic drumming. Another thing that he discovered around the time that he was discovering Jung. And it's a process of letting the conscious mind going inside, and then asking to be shown something, asking to see something.
That's interesting.
And then you take the images that are shown and hold them in your mind, allow them to unfold to be what they need to be.
Yeah.
So this is how he would approach commissions often. He would envision the person who's asking to write the thing and say, what does this person need? Tell me something about this.
Oh, wow.
And so in a lot of ways, he treated it like a way of healing.
Interesting. Yeah. This is all very fascinating to me. As I listen to you, it makes me think about things and consider like my own practices. Yeah. Yeah. So spirituality definitely comes through. And I like this idea. I mean, you keep coming back to the stripping down to the core, finding the core, but filling a need with music, with your art. Mm-hmm. I don't know how I want to say it. It makes it feel, I'm trying to think of myself, the creator at the moment. And like, to write something to fill a need is very different than to write something because someone wants it.
Yeah. People don't usually know why they want a thing.
Mm-hmm.
People usually have superficial ideas about why they want a thing, but they have rarely interrogated their underlying need.
Right.
Like, I need a piece of music for the opening of my new school's gymnasium is different than I don't feel worthy of love.
Uh-huh.
And I hope that this will demonstrate to people that I am a worthy person.
Uh-huh. Boy, that lays it out, talking about getting to the heart of a thing.
So they are, if you're writing from the place of, well, we need a functional piece of music, you get a functional piece of music.
Sure.
It will be perfectly acceptable. But if you are addressing the actual situation, dynamics of the thing, the relationships between people and with themselves, and you start having a piece of music which can work inside you and help you understand yourself and help move you internally.
Yeah, no doubt, no doubt. That's very powerful. And to be honest, that's what your father's music does to people when they hear it. It's very moving. When you're in a hall and you hear a band play Give Us This Day or Symphony No. 4, it's a memorable experience.
It is.
And it leaves an impression. And again, this is not to throw any one under the bus, because I'm included in the masses of people who write music for band that often it's unremarkable, but I don't feel like a lot of your father's music is that way. Like it feels very thoughtful in every note. Now not everything's perfect. I know that, but
he would say that his superpower is diligence.
Mm-hmm. I see that. You hear that.
And that nothing went out the door until it was right.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a very high standard of what he called right.
He had a phrase, do the work. Am I correct? Yes. Is that what he said?
Show up every day.
Show up every day, right. So let's talk about that aspect, because obviously you've been talking about it, but that diligence, that work ethic.
That is the space for creativity. It doesn't matter if you write a lick of notes, anything at all. You show up, you set your day, you set your time, and then you show up, and then that's the space. You're not digging around your phone. You're not talking to your friends. You're not doing anything except being in this space.
Yep, absolutely.
And what happens is that something usually pokes through. But unless you provide the space for it to happen, it will not.
Creativity needs space for itself. Otherwise, the outside influences are going to just tamp it down. All those things aren't going to come through.
So this is the idea of making a thing sacred.
Mm-hmm. I like that idea.
You make a boundary around a sacred place, and then within that, you behave in a particular fashion. So this works with religious practice. This works with concerts. A concert hall is a sacred space.
Mm-hmm.
We have delineated this place. We behave in a certain way, and we are there in communion to receive the blessing of awareness. But it doesn't work if it's in the middle of the freeway.
It's interesting because, again, I'm going to relate this to my audience who are primarily band directors who are listening. One of the things that we do as band directors, and this from your time as a musician, is we're taught from day one that it's all about process with the students. Mickey Smith, who's been on the show, was a Grammy-nominated educator, calls it first days, lasting ways. In other words, when you come into the band room, you act a certain way, you come in a certain way, you sit a certain way, and it's that sacred space. This is putting it into sort of band terms, but if you don't create that sacred space with your practice area, with your rehearsal hall, with your band room, with my studio where I write music, then you're not going to have as much success. I think that's a really interesting way to look at it.
So when you have disruptions to that space, it degrades the experience.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So kids running around yelling on their phones, whatever it is, you can't get the work done. And I think this is one of the reasons that band becomes a haven for people who do not feel like they have a place other places. So band rooms tend to be a place where the weird kids hang out, because it's a place where we're here to work, we're here to be present, and we're here to get music done.
There's also love in that space too because of those things. You know, I never felt out of place in a band room in my entire life. I felt out of place nearly every other place, but never in a band room.
Right. So that all are welcome if you want to do the work.
Yeah, and there's no question that all good band directors know is to create that culture that you're talking about that allows that to happen.
And you're certainly aware that most band directors become therapists.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or need therapy.
But it takes holding space for other people is a basic requirement of the job of the band director.
Yeah, teacher in general, but yeah.
And so that takes an enormous amount of energy, and absolutely band directors need a place for themselves to be held.
Yeah. I want to talk about that a little bit because, you know, I did a solo episode of this right before Midwest where I just talked about my experiences in the last 2 years. Mm-hmm. And I've sort of really struggled with some mental health things. And I guess it wasn't that they were new, but it's that they became more accentuated and aggravated during the stress of the pandemic. Sure. And so I've had to kind of deal with some of my own issues. And one of them being is that I have ADD and never really knew it. Now I'm very high functioning. It's not a problem, but you know, there's this, and I have some depressive tendencies. And so you mentioned that your father did struggle in the middle, or it's kind of in those middle years. Yeah. And I think we need to talk about that more. I think we need to be more honest that this is something that is normal and a lot of people deal with it, and we should bring it to light. So I'm wondering if maybe we could talk a little more about that.
Sure. So I was born in 1982. Mm-hmm. And my brother was born in 1972. Okay. So he got to see a little bit more of this than I did. Mm-hmm. So by the time that I came around, Dad was himself. He was a fully realized person.
Sure.
So I did not see him broken and having difficulty. So all I have are a couple of stories and the sense that I've gotten over the years from this time. So the way that I understand it is that he had a really difficult relationship with his mother. Mm-hmm. She was controlling and abusive. They grew up in a Jehovah's Witness family, and it was an extremely repressive sort of place. And his outlet was clarinet. So he played in the Greater Boston Youth Orchestra and eventually made his way through music to college and to writing, and escaped as hard as he could. But he was plagued is a hard word, but it's a deeply depressed for much of his young life, mm-hmm. and didn't really have the tools to express it or to be aware of it internally. And the only way that he became aware of it was when it became a crisis.
Yeah, that's probably not uncommon.
And so he was a heavy drinker and became alcoholic over the course of the 70s. Mm-hmm. And starting the day with a pint of gin, that kind of.
Yeah.
And what depressants do is distract you. It's dull you. Mm-hmm. And it's a way of dealing with the thing without dealing with it. And I suspect that this leads to the insight that distraction is not useful anymore. When you get past the need for it, you realize how much time and energy it's taken to distract you from being yourself and to understand who you are.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Yeah. Did he saw counseling and all that stuff? And
he did. I'm not clear on this point completely, but I know he did group therapy and individual therapy. He was a union psychologist, and that was his way in.
So now I'm just going to kind of dip back a little bit. So you mentioned that your father left college teaching. And, I mentioned earlier, I have a similar experience. And in fact, it was triggered in part by the conversation I had with your father. And you guys moved to Missoula. What were the other candidates? Morbid curiosity, or not morbid, but curiosity.
I believe places like Seattle on the list. Pocatello, Idaho, I remember.
Pocatello, Idaho.
Yeah. A couple other places. The list were things like you needed to have mountains, you needed to have a college.
Okay. You
needed to be a place where mom could deal with horses.
Okay. So you're narrowing the list down pretty quickly at this point.
Right.
You're like Boulder, Missoula.
Right. And yeah, the choice of Missoula basically came down to mom finding a rental like literally hours before her flight back to New York.
Oh, interesting.
And it just sort of clicked and it worked out.
So I've never been to Missoula, but I actually know several composers from Montana, including Chris Stark, who's here in St. Louis, and he studied with your father a little bit, I know, in Missoula. What was it like growing up there?
It's a really nice place, filled with nice people trying to do good things. I felt, mostly because of my own oddness, I suspect that I am mildly autistic. I've never been diagnosed, but there's a level of, I always felt like I needed to figure out people from the outside and groups from the outside. And so what I would do is I would pay very, very close attention to how group dynamics worked and then emulate that rather than just do it. And so it's difficult for me to say that it was a pleasant time.
Right. Okay.
Because I was working really, really hard. And when I go back to Missoula now, it is beautiful, but it is not my place. It's not really my home.
No, I understand that.
So I live in the middle of New York City. I'm in Midtown Manhattan. Mm-hmm. And this is my place. Okay. This is where the energy feels right for me.
Mm-hmm. That makes perfect sense.
There's a character of intentness and focus that you get. New York is too expensive to be here without a purpose.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense.
And so what happens is that the people who gravitate here tend to be doing something interesting. And what I found in Missoula is that people are very comfortable where they are.
It's just interesting to me. I don't know how I want to say that, Matthew. I don't know if it's worth pursuing. Just kind of like the way our spaces define us in a way, or shape us if they do. Because I've lived in a lot of places, I'm always thinking about these things.
They cannot but shape us. So we are. It's a symbiotic relationship between you and a space. You cannot have one without the other. This is form and content. So let's get into some of the nuts and bolts of what you're actually doing with your dad's music. So now you are, and you did mention that, would you say a little bit more than half or less than half is with Carl Fisher and others? We do about 80 works.
I see.
Depending on how you count it.
So you guys have control of 80 works under his copyright. And so now you are the publisher of that. How much goes out? You don't have to give me numbers, but like, how busy is it? Are you still getting a lot of orders all the time for your dad's music? Or
yeah, it's certainly less than pre-pandemic.
Sure.
It's more difficult for people to get things done and budgets are tighter.
Yeah.
But one of the things that in my major project over the last year and a half has been to build a new website for the publishing business to make it convenient and easy for people to get the music. It's been quite a much larger success than I would have credited, which I'm glad to say.
Well, that's great. That's terrific. And you're keeping kind of the legacy alive and not letting it. I know a lot of composers, when they pass away, sometimes their music just languishes. That's not under a publisher. Or even if they are published, that publisher no longer sort of tends to that garden, if you will.
So the deal with publishers is that their business model heavily incentivizes getting a as much material as they can, getting as many composers as they can, getting as many writers as they can, and as many works as they can, and then betting that something's going to do something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this comes back to our creativity discussion earlier.
Right.
You know, putting the time in, the more time you put in, the more likely you are to be creative. By the same token, the more work you do and the more works you put out, the more likely you are to hit on something. It's, sure. Yeah.
But with that mentality, often either the quality suffers or the attention given to their individual writers can suffer.
Indeed.
And so one of the things that I can do, because I just published Dad's music, and I will be publishing my own soon enough, that I know, I wouldn't say everything there is to know about the music, but pretty damn close.
Yeah, sure.
That I am deeply interested in the success of the music because I believe it is a unqualified good for humanity.
Absolutely.
I am in perhaps the enviable position of not having a bad thing to sell. Ever.
Yeah, you and Brahms.
I can unqualifiedly recommend anything in this catalog.
Sure. So you said something interesting there, and I know that you said that you almost have a doctorate in music, but you're writing.
Yeah.
So what are you writing?
Not much at the moment.
Well,
I have historically, when people have come to Dad, especially middle school directors or lower tier high school directors, Dad will say, "Hey, this is what the number is," and they'll go, "Hey, that's a lot of money." And I said, "Why don't you give my son a call?" And so I've written a few things for younger groups, which has been a really kind of eye-opening experience of being able to see both how much better they are than I think they are and where they fall down.
Yeah.
So from that experience, I've written a handful of chamber pieces, stuff for euphoniums and brass works. And then when Dad died and he left the Symphony into 10 unfinished and some sketches and asked me to finish it, that was the opportunity to go, well, was I paying attention all this time? And this felt like my final test. my
I would say you have a way of really understating things here, Matthew. I'm going to give you, this is a gift you have.
I find that using moderate language allows me to use high voltage language appropriately.
I see. Yeah, I mean, if someone, like, if I were in that same position now, my father was a history teacher, not a composer, but like if he had left to work with me, I would have been like, I would have felt overwhelmed.
Well, yeah, it was an overwhelming time.
I bet. Yeah, sure. Well, because you're dealing with the grief too.
Absolutely.
You know.
So my mother and father both died within a month.
Yeah, I knew that.
And I started working on the thing maybe a month or two after. Because we had a concert date February the following year. This was in August. I started. And it took a long time to get past just seeing his handwriting on the paper.
Yeah, I bet.
And then getting to, okay, what is this music actually trying to do? And then, okay, we're getting this piece done.
That's really tough. I mean, my father passed away in 2015, and there's things I don't want to look at or interact with because it's too painful. There's too much of the grief that's still there.
So imagine that your father's work was your livelihood and that you had to represent it in the world. I do not envy you that position. What this has afforded me is an enormous amount of processing.
Yeah, and probably with a good bit of therapeutic writing involved in this.
So I have had to look at all the hard stuff as deeply as I think it's maybe possible to do, and to allow it to be hard, allow it to be painful.
You have to, because you're not doing justice to those emotions or yourself or the memories if you don't. I mean, I want to feel pain when I think about the good things or the things I miss. That's what makes it worthwhile.
Sure.
Right? There's There's a certain kind of, that raw emotion is what ties people together. I mean, love is what that is. And so it's painful when it's not there, or when it's severed, I guess.
Sure. So one of the things that I am focused on is, because my life has been so heavily influenced and dominated by his, one of the difficulties that I am working through is, how do I become my own person?
Yes. And
how do I develop my own voice?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And that is a particularly tricky thing, seeing how my conception of music from its very beginnings was colored by his.
Mm-hmm. So in a way, you can't ever completely divorce yourself from him.
Well, I'm not sure that I would want to.
Yeah.
But how it stops being his and starts being mine. It is as genuine a part of me as anything else.
Sure, of course it is. Of course it is.
And so the development process is taking that and seeing what's true about that for me, and then developing that part. So
what would your next project be as a composer? If you had a perfect project and it wasn't.
I don't think there is such a thing as a perfect project.
Okay, well, what would you want to do next?
Right. One of the things that I've been playing with is getting into electronic music and producing tracks that are... One of the problems that I see with electronic music, especially dance music, is that it is deeply boring.
Yeah, it's non-developmental for sure.
That's almost by it's by design.
Yeah. It's what it is.
It's designed so that you jump up and down, and it goes thumpy, thumpy, thump, and you have a good time.
Mm-hmm.
But there's really interesting sounds there. There's really interesting vibes there that can be developed into something that is more interesting, that is more engaging.
Sure.
So one of the problems that the band world has is that it does not have a very good bass voice.
Not particularly.
That you can put all the tubas and bass trombones on it that you want, and contrabass, clarinets, and all that, and it's fine, but it doesn't punch you in the like a saw wave.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's that kind of character of wall of sound that is focused and crisp is hard to get anywhere else but a synthesizer.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really attractive to me. I think it would be something to be able to incorporate electronics into wind music in a way that doesn't get weird and bad. I think it would be an interesting thing to work on a whole experience. I think band music doesn't really understand how to be theatrical.
No, it clearly doesn't.
And when I go to a show, I want to see a show. I want to be entertained. I want to be engaged. I want to be transported.
Mm-hmm.
You see something like a Broadway production or just a movie, for God's sake. And it's a whole thing, the whole situation. You show up, you are guided through the experience top to bottom, and then you are left changed. And in band world, we have these four pieces that have nothing to do with each other, and also a march for some goddamn reason. And the goals of band directors seem to be around developing their students' technique and musicianship, which is all to the good. But I think if there's an overarching vision, then you can engage your students and your audience in that vision. And then you get all of the personal development musicianship for free because they're engaged in your vision. So I think it would be quite something to do, to write an evening of music, which is designed for winds and which has the whole experience designed around it. How people come into the theater, what's going on around them, the whole process.
That's interesting.
A Gesamtkunstwerk, if you might,
mm-hmm.
if you will.
Yeah.
I think Wagner had the right idea on that.
One of the few.
Overlapping climaxes for Wagner are some of the best things in the music.
Yeah, you know what? I do agree with you, because one of the things that I personally struggle with in my own musical sensibility, And maybe this is why I find your father's music attractive, is and what you're talking about is that I tend to be very dramatic. Mm-hmm. I have a hard time as a composer just writing exposition.
Sure.
In other words, I want things to happen all the time. I think I probably should have been an opera composer if I had lived 100 years ago. I have this sort of sense of drama. And that's interesting that you're saying that, because you're kind of tingling some things in the back of my head, tickling some ideas a little bit.
Sure.
Not the way I wouldn't do it the way you do it, because I don't conceive it that way, but certainly this idea. And I've been coming at this from the point of creativity, that we have to try to reach out to more kids on their terms rather than force them into our terms. And I would like to incorporate more creativity, more of the student body who are not necessarily instrumentalists in a classical sense, but perhaps vernacular styles on their own. And I just feel like there's things that can happen here.
Sure. With that kind of idea, it's easy to get into the how do you do fellow kids situation.
Yeah.
And I suspect that the way forward is in providing space for people to be themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm a huge advocate. I don't think we need to get rid of band, choir, and orchestra to make way for electronic music. I think every school should hire another teacher to do nothing but teach electronic music in studio, sure. Because it's really the piece of the music world that many kids want to be part of, whether they're in band or out of band, that we don't offer it. And I think there's this feeling of being threatened by music teachers. They feel threatened by this coming in, when we should be embracing this.
Major benefit of electronic production is that the barrier to entry is very, very low.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You do not need to read music.
Right.
You just need some kind of computer, or even, honestly, you can do it on your phone. That you just need to be able to make a beat, figure out how chord progressions work, and fiddle with some sounds and make a nice thing.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So there's a democracy to it that mm-hmm. you don't get with. I have 30 years of training
mm-hmm.
to do this thing. I know pretty much everything there is to know about music notation.
Mm-hmm.
I can write in, a dozen styles.
Mm-hmm. I know where you're going with this. Continue.
And anybody trying to get into this looks at that and goes, well, I don't have that time. I don't have that space. I just want to dig around and have fun.
Right. And that word is important, because we know that motivation that's intrinsic leads to more success.
Yeah.
And so if you're having fun doing something, the chances are you're going to pursue it harder. So
making a sound on an instrument that you want to listen to takes a while.
Yes.
And honestly, for some instruments, it takes a long while.
Yeah, and it takes a certain personality to want to pursue it past a certain beginning level.
Right.
Because there's a lot of work for little payoff in the beginning.
So with the benefit of piano is that you get a good sound no matter what you do. And so there's all the mechanics of getting getting around the keyboard, but you don't have to worry about your face falling off after 10 minutes.
Mm-hmm. Interestingly, my children who started piano when they were 5, they both started instruments this year. My daughter's playing violin, my son percussion, and they both like those instruments better than the piano.
Sure.
Maybe because it's new.
Novelty is a winner.
Indeed.
The magic of a synthesizer and of sample-based playback is that you get this truly infinite variety of sounds that you don't have to be perfect right off, or you don't have to have your embouchure set up right. You don't have to do the thing. You just need to set up the waveform so that it comes out properly. The
other interesting problem, I think, is that you and I both know that conservatory training, the traditional university training, is very much Western classical concert music. I did jazz in college. I have some jazz background, but pop is pretty much self-taught. And so I have a little bit of a, what's the word I'm trying to say is, I'm a little bit hesitant to expose myself as using rock and pop genres because I don't feel like maybe I have the credentials or you know what I mean? There's this kind of like lack of, because I'm so highly trained in the other that I'm uncomfortable being untrained in this.
I am really used to knowing what's going on. Mm-hmm. I'm used to being the one giving the comments. Uh-huh. So when I am taking piano lessons here, it's deeply strange. Uh-huh. Like you're telling me, like, I don't know all the answers immediately. What is this nonsense?
Right.
Or a little while ago, I studied Krav Maga, and it's like, as an absolute beginner, this is Israeli martial arts, mm-hmm. and it was freeing to not know.
Yeah. No, it's a good place.
It was okay to be a beginner.
Yeah, it is okay to be a beginner. No, I have to tell you, I was a band director in the 90s, and then I went and taught college for years and years. When I came back to teach fourth grade beginners, that first year I felt like I was like 22 and knew nothing. You know, it was like, I don't know what I'm doing, but I could like analyze, you know, you name what. I could take a Bach fugue apart and rewrite it in a couple hours, but I couldn't get a clarinet player to get a good sound.
Oh, maybe you're holding it backwards. I don't know.
No, I didn't quite. It wasn't quite that bad.
Blowing the small end.
No. I knew how to get. Knew that stuff. But you know, like the little subtleties, the little things you say to a kid that maybe resonate that you see. It's like, but you just do this and it happens. But you don't. You know, it's that craft of communicating that idea to another person.
I've heard songwriting described as 3 chords and the truth. Uh-huh. And it's miserably difficult.
It is. No, it's really hard to write a song because of that, because it's such a spare genre and a spare format that everything matters more. You know, a 50-minute symphony, not that it's easy by any means, of course not, but there's maybe a little more room to swerve.
It's less under the microscope.
Yeah. Well, each individual note is certainly. Yeah.
Hey there, everyone. My name is Anne Molesky, and I'm the host of the Anna Krusik Podcast, another podcast in the Muted Network. I've helped teacher musicians just like you get more intentional in their classrooms through my trainings, curriculum, and teacher talk. Because the truth is, teaching music is hard. You have a bunch of kids to teach and not a lot of free time to figure out how. Feeling overwhelmed and frustrated is totally normal. But here's the good news. It only takes a few simple steps to flip the script. It may be simple, but it's definitely not easy unless you have the right toolkit. So let's start tuning and transforming your music teacher life right now. Join me on Mondays for tips, tricks, and community conversations about how to make the general music classroom more intentional and impactful for both you and your students. We'll talk about the actual actionable steps you need to find the purpose, follow a sequence, and choose joy in your classroom each and every day. I'll see you there.
So Matthew, I ask a series of questions at the end of every interview, and these are to you, not to you through your father. Okay. Because I don't, as you said earlier, I never wanted this interview to be, I wanted it to be about both of you and your relationship, and you share what you knew and what's happening with his music now. But I want to ask you these questions from your perspective, because I find you to be an interesting thinker in music, which is not unexpected, knowing that your father was an original thinker in music as well. And so I kind of want to get your opinion on these things. And so I ask these of everybody. But the first one is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition in music?
I think that competition in music is largely useless, and it's mostly about flattering the competition organizers. So I've been considering putting together, I was approached to do a composition contest with under Dad's name. And as I was developing the ideas, I realized first, Dad hated competition. It was a terrible idea. Trying to get music to win didn't really help anything. So I recast the thing as a workshop. So with a blinded pool of applicants. So you send in music, and if we like it, we do another round, and we invite a few people out to work on the music, and with a group, get it recorded and get it published. So this is people who are interested in being composers, who have some music already, and who are interested in writing a new thing. So it turns into a filtering mechanism for people who are interested in achieving and a platform for them to succeed. It's easy to turn cutthroat, and it's easy to get mean-spirited and petty. And I thought it was a useful thing to focus as hard as possible on the creative aspects of why people are doing music in the first place. It is impressive to say you won the Van Cliburn competition. It is impressive to say you won a job. It is impressive to say that you want to, that you're the best at something. And what that credential does is that it opens doors for you. You get offers that you wouldn't otherwise get. You get positions that would be closed to other people. You get invitations to things. It is useful as a business certification.
Mm-hmm. A stamp of approval, if you will.
Right. This is a thing that says somebody thought you were okay.
It's often for reasons other than the music. It's often for reasons about self-esteem and things like this.
It is almost never about the music. So what do I think is healthy competition? It's hard to say. That if you understand competition to be about getting that seal of approval and it's a means to an end, then I suppose.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
But mistaking it for an artistic experience for anybody is not helpful.
All right, Matthew. So I think you already addressed this about how your father found his balance, but how do you find a work-life balance as a musician?
I will let you know. During the pandemic time was the first time that I had anything resembling a break in something like 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
For a lot of people, I suspect. And I took that time and I developed good routines, regular sleep, good eating, good exercise, dropped a bunch of weight, felt really good.
Mm-hmm.
And then the world opened back up and everything went to hell, which told me that everything that I've ever understood about personal well-being and taking care of myself is true. Eating right, exercising, meditating, journaling, all that stuff works really well. It's effective. Gets my mind right, gets my body right, I feel good, I feel focused and happy. Told me that I don't know how to integrate working hard with that. Or working hard was always the thing that had to happen. And so everything else got deprioritized. And so over the last few months, as I've gotten fatter and my brain has gotten weirder, my major project this year is to figure out what elements I can keep that were the most helpful from my healthy practices, and then what I need to devote to actually do the character and quality and volume of work that's required of me.
Yeah, I think about your father's morning routine. To me, that seems like where he found some of his balance.
Dad had a much simpler life. It was made possible by my mom. She did labor around the house. She made the house work. She made the money work. She made the kids work. She allowed him to do the things that he needed to do. So she is not credited on the front of the page of the symphony for as much as she was the producer.
Sure.
She was the bulldog who went after people who didn't pay him. She talked to band directors almost more than he did because they would call the house and he'd be working and they would talk to her. So she was the person who allowed him to be him. And I don't have that situation. I live by myself. I have a dog. I am really, really happy to be living by myself. But that also means that the list of people I get to call when the carpet needs to be vacuumed is very short.
True.
So you can solve some of this with money. I can hire a housekeeper. I can hire a chef, or I can eat out, or I can have delivery. There are ways of substituting this, but it takes far more cash than you might think, and is often not as good as you can do yourself.
Okay, Matthew, this is a big question. I don't expect anyone to have all of the answers because there's no such thing. But from your perspective, from your experience, what are the challenges facing music education and band? And do you have any ideas about how we would meet those challenges?
I'm not a band director. I've never been one. I know a lot of band directors.
Mm-hmm.
I've been around them all my life. Virtually none of their time is spent directing a band.
That's the truth.
And the level of directors have to be all things to all people at all times, and to pick up the stands from the one venue and take it to the next venue, make sure the timpani has the head, make sure the fundraising is going all right, make sure the permission slips are got signed. God, all right.
I'm telling you, it is. I tell my high school band director friends, it is so liberating to teach like fourth graders.
Yeah.
It really is. A lot of that stuff doesn't exist at the lower levels. Anyway, continue.
I suspect that music education would improve dramatically if people had their stress levels reduced by even 10%.
Mm-hmm.
People usually get into directing bands because they love it, because they love the students, because they love the rep, because they want to do something good.
Mm-hmm.
And they're driven out of it because it's a mind and soul shredding experience.
Mm-hmm.
I am not sure that change in this direction can come from the directors themselves, and that it needs to come from the administration layer.
I also think it needs to start at the college level, the education programs as well, but that's my own bias, I guess.
I suspect that a way forward might be some element of unionization, of being able to get together and require better working conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Always the difficulty with this, though, is that you run the risk of being cut entirely. The devil's bargain that most people make is, well, it sucks, but at least we can do it a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you have to make the choice whether or not the risk of nothing is worth a little bit better.
Yeah, there's a lot of forces at play right now, too. Yeah, I'll just leave it there.
So this turns into a political minefield very, very quickly.
Oh, sure it does.
We can make all the arguments that we want about how useful music is at developing students. And you've made them, and everybody knows made them. And administrators look at that and go, well, okay, but it doesn't make a dent on the test.
Yeah.
And making the same case over and over to people who don't care gets soul crushing. Absolutely.
Yeah. And people who don't want to care, they don't want to listen.
Whose job depends on them not understanding.
All right, Matthew, let's get off of this topic because I get frustrated very quickly.
I mean, hey, you asked.
So, okay, this is actually my favorite question of the interview, and I'm going to ask it of you because you obviously don't know what your father's answer would be. If I had a time machine, I could take you back to the afternoon or the evening of your high school graduation. What advice would you give to yourself?
The reality of the thing is that I probably wouldn't have listened. That the only thing that's ever taught that taught me anything was getting banged on the head over and over again. Being arrogant until somebody said that that hurt them. Realizing, I've been hurting people for a while. I need to stop that. Jumping into things blindly because I thought they were cool without taking stock of the whole situation, or at least even the barest attempt at just taking stock. I might say it's okay to play. It's okay to be a kid. You don't have to be an adult immediately all the time.
Yeah, no, it's true. It's true.
I wanted to be an adult basically since I was 6.
Mm-hmm. No, I know. I get that.
And I have deeply craved being taken seriously.
I'm the youngest of 6 children. My nearest sibling is 9 years older than I. My parents were older when I was growing up, so I deeply identify with that. It wasn't until I turned about 40 that I felt that I was with my peer group.
Yeah.
It's an odd place to be as a kid, always looking at older people and not feeling comfortable around your peers.
So it's okay to relax, man.
Yeah, no doubt.
It's okay to have fun.
Yeah.
None of this stuff is going to stick, honestly.
Yeah, it's true.
It may stick a little more these days because the internet forgets nothing. But also there's so much stuff flying around the internet that nobody cares.
Yeah, in a way that the inundation has almost made it unremarkable.
It's okay. It's always going to be okay. Even if it's not okay, it's still okay. You can move forward from whatever this is.
Yeah. No doubt. I think that's something that young people definitely don't understand, is that there's really nothing that can't be overcome. There's very few things. I mean, what my father always say, death and taxes.
I think the word overcome is not helpful in this way. There's nothing that cannot be accepted and understood. So overcome, there's an idea that you have to push it away or get over it or conquer it in some fashion. And usually conquering a thing is a zero-sum game. That the conquered thing is either damaged or you are damaged as a result of this. That the adverse situation or even the good situation is an opportunity for growth, an opportunity for interrogation of oneself and one's surroundings. So actually coming back to The Matrix, so it's one of the very, very few movies that I know, and at the end of the third movie, when, spoiler alert, Neo and Agent Smith merge and then are transcendent, where the villain and the hero are unified. They are two halves of the same coin, and they become each other, and then become the greater understanding. And that moment to me was powerful. I have seen villains get killed and beat down and subjugated most of the time. I've seen a lot of movies, and almost never do they understand each other properly, get to each other and resolve their conflict properly in a way that a human might do it. So that is, for me, a model of dealing with adversity.
I like that idea of, not everything is confrontational. It's a very Taoist kind of way of looking at life. Sometimes you just have to let things flow past you rather than trying to dam them up.
In fact, damming them up is usually what got you into trouble in the first place.
Probably. All right, Matthew. If you could plan out the final piece of music that you'd perform or listen to, do you know what it would be?
Might be Goldberg.
It's a good choice.
I've been practicing Goldberg variations now for a few months. I've listened to pretty much every recording made several times.
What's your favorite?
I keep on coming back to Gould 82.
The Gould's great. I really like Keith Jarrett's.
Rosalind Turek does a really authentic articulation and ornaments, but Gould has a character of playfulness and just relaxation with the thing that I don't think I've heard anywhere else.
Yeah, he's the same way. I think his Well-Tempered Clavier is the same way. It's just very...
So the variations continually unfold themselves to me. There are more and more connections internally and they just work as pieces of music. So often you get something that's highly constructed, it's kind of lifeless. And this just jumps.
No doubt.
Jumps off the board.
No doubt. I'm going to turn this around a little bit to kind of ask you this. Do you have a sense, if someone who had never heard your father's music were to go up to him and ask him, what piece would he have them listen to or engage with of his? Do you know?
Turns out there's a page on our website devoted just to this.
Really? I didn't know that.
Yeah. So on the front page of davidmaslanka.com, there's a little tab that says "This Way In," and so
This Way In.
Yeah, he talks about himself, and that he gives a couple of recommendations as to pieces that you might like. And he talks about Child's Garden of Dreams and Symphony No. 4 and Remember Me. They represent different periods in his writing.
I asked this question that I just asked you of band directors, and overwhelmingly the responses are either your father's Symphony No. 4 or Lincolnshire Posy by Granger. So I would say that the vast majority of people would agree with your father on Symphony No. 4. But to me, Symphony No. 4 is almost too big.
If you want to know what he's about, you almost need to start with the epic length. It's not even that epic. It's a half hour.
But it's so big.
It's
within a half an hour.
It's the length of a sitcom.
Yeah, I know, but there's many more layers to this onion than a sitcom.
There are shorter works. There are perhaps more exciting works.
Mm-hmm, sure.
But at his core, he is about understanding the truth of a moment, the truth of the music as it exists. And to do that, often you need a couple of minutes. You need to take the time to be present in it. And so the work's length allows you to become comfortable and to allow it to work inside you.
All right, Matthew, is there anything coming up that you want to share or promote?
Honestly, just the site. This is maslankapress.com. It's the easiest way to get at music. We have individual parts that are available. I know it's never happened to any of your listeners, but I know for myself, sometimes I have lost a piece of, like a clarinet 2 part, for example. and if you need it for a concert tonight, you can get it today and PDF straight to your inbox. And also, none of it is watermarked. I don't believe in treating my customers as criminals. I'll trust you to do the right thing with it. Here's a PDF. It's unlocked. It's unmarked. Use it for yourself and enjoy it.
Absolutely.
So I believe that the best solution for private piracy is to have reasonably priced thing that's easy to get.
All right, Matthew. So how could people get in touch with you if they have some questions or they want to order some music?
Come to maslankapress.com. There's a contact form there. Also, you can email me directly, matthew@maslanka.org, and I am happy to talk with you about the music. I am happy to go over scores with you, offer comments on rehearsal recordings. I will work with your group over Zoom, or if you feel like it, you can bring me out and I can work in person.
Excellent.
So I am here to help, and it's free for all, and donate what you feel like.
Excellent. Matthew, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. We had a great conversation.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.